Did you know that Francis Scott Key, who wrote the Star Spangled Banner, was not even a musician? Did you know that the first Easter eggs were colored by the Vikings? Crazy. How about, you ever hear the story of the peasant who was once crowned king just for driving an ox cart by a temple at the right time? Crazy stories here. This is actually an interesting collection I recently found from 1968. I've been doing a lot of episodes, or all the episodes I've done so far, are really from the time of John Hix, who started Strange as It Seems and ran it till 1944, and then Ernest Jr, who ran it till 48, who was my grandfather, and then Elsie Hix, who took it over. But she actually gave it over to my father and my mom back like really in the late 1960s. So Ernest and Phyllis Hix, my parents, Ernest Jr, ran the comic strip in the late 1960s. I don't have a lot of comic strips, or at least I haven't found them yet, but I found this collection of Sunday comics that someone had from 1968, and I just sent away for them on eBay and got these in. So let's take a quick dive. These are actually in chronological order, but we've got a lot of the Sunday comics from 1968 from the time of Ernest and Phyllis Hix. Let's dive in. Welcome back. This is Jeff Hix, curator of the Strange as It Seems archives and grandnephew of John Hix, who created Strange as It Seems back in the late 1920s. Before I dive into this week's episode on all the Sunday comics I just recently found from 1968, I'd like to ask you to hit the bell, both bells, all three bells, hit all the bells for like, subscribe, follow. Please leave a comment. That goes a long way in helping me bring back this 100-year-old brand for the digital age. So let's dive in. Sunday comics from 1968. The first one, this is from January 8th, 1968. Brazil's Rio Negro River, fascinating place. It's so black that light does not penetrate even over 6 feet. It's made dark by all the plant juices and tree saps that apparently contain insect-killing hormones, so kind of known as the river of insecticide. Crazy. Brazil's Rio Negro River. In 1968 was the era of the Vietnam War. So this was kind of a fascinating one for me to find. It's an Army helicopter crew recently evacuated a South Vietnamese village, but only after the crew completely dismantled and loaded the village church, because the people refused to leave without their church. So the helicopter crew completely dismantled the church and flew it out with the crew. Amazing. This is 1968, time of the Vietnam War. Here's one from, looks like also in January. Thomas Christian. He's a descendant of Fletcher Christian, who was the leader of Mutiny on the Bounty, but he operates a radio station on Pitcairn Island in the Pacific. There's some 90 descendants of the mutineers at the time that were still living on Pitcairn Island. Kind of amazing. Flip through a couple more of these. How about the Pied Piper of Oregon? This is in February. Colin Fraser, a Scott soldier, frightened off an entire Indian war party with his bagpipes. Amazing. The weird sound scared the Indians into signing a peace treaty, which was never broken. This is Fort Vancouver, Oregon country in the early 19th century. Pied Piper of Oregon. How about that? And this one I covered at the top of the episode, but Francis Scott Key, he basically wrote the words of the national anthem. He was not a musician. He was a lawyer, and for many years a district attorney for the District of Columbia. And before he wrote the Star Spangled Banner, he had already composed a song to the same tune, To Anacreon in Heaven, amazing, in honor of the Americans who had subdued the Barbary pirates. Never knew that, strange as it seems. How about Niagara of the South? During a full moon, the Cumberland Falls in Kentucky has a moonbow. I've never heard of this, which can be seen through the mist. One of the only two places in the world where it's ever been observed, a moonbow, a rainbow at night. How about that? Did you know the first Easter eggs were actually colored by the Vikings? Crazy. By early Norsemen to simulate the aurora borealis. and colors of the Easter sunrise. They called Easter Ostara, the festival of spring. Amazing that Easter originally comes from the Vikings. Here's an actor, Neville Brand. Kind of amazing guy. I never heard of him either. He was the fourth most decorated hero of World War II. He was only one of, there's only 99 out of 3,000 survivors of Lord Mountbatten's commandos. Later, with the American occupation forces, badly wounded 3 times, and upon his return to the U.S., he was advised to take up acting for therapeutic reasons. Amazing to forget his harrowing experiences. Yet in most of his movies and on TV, he wields a gun as a lawman, soldier, or a gangster. Amazing actor there. Neville Brand. James Shields, American statesman from 1810 to 1879, served as the U.S. Senator from 3 different states, Illinois, Minnesota, and Missouri, was also governor of the Oregon Territory and also justice of the Supreme Court in the state of Illinois. Amazing James Shields. I've seen this one a few times before. It looks like, I think my parents resurrected this, but there was the Mad Ruler of Bavaria, Ludwig II. He was accompanied by a groom and detailed maps for a trip to Innsbruck, Austria. He entered the riding school, then ordered the doors closed, and the 2 men rode around inside the school at a maddening pace until the next morning. And glancing at the maps, Ludwig was convinced that they had reached Innsbruck. Crazy, the Mad Ruler of Bavaria. Do you know that Queen Victoria, amazing, she had 15 children and grandchildren who were either rulers of or married rulers of Russia, Greece, Germany, Romania, Spain, and several of the lesser kingdoms. Amazing, the legacy of Queen Victoria. This is one of my favorite stories from this year. Check this out. The peasant who was crowned king. Consulting the oracles, the people of the ancient kingdom of the Phrygians, long without a ruler, were told to choose the first man to pass the temple who was driving an ox cart as their king. Isn't that amazing? Running to the temple, the throng immediately proclaimed Gordius, a peasant who had been driving by in an ox cart, as their king. Amazing. That's how Gordius became king of the Phrygians. What an amazing story. What an amazing life. Can you imagine that happening? John Singer Sargent was a portrait artist, born in Italy, educated in Italy and Germany, studied painting in Spain, Italy, and France, lived in England, refused an offer of knighthood because he considered himself, first of all, an American. Never heard of him. John Singer Sargent. Amazing. Grand Canyon Caverns, that's kind of an amazing place. Under seawater, there's a mummified sloth in there that's 50,000 years old. St. Michael's Cathedral, Sitka, Alaska, built from logs and timbers from a wrecked ship. How about Stephen, the first Hungarian monarch, one of the great constructive statesmen of history? In 1938, his mummified hand, which had been kept as a sacred relic in Budapest for 900 years, was taken on a tour of Hungarian towns in a specifically constructed railway car, guarded by 16 carefully chosen guards. That's kind of a crazy story. William Tecumseh Sherman, a Union soldier during the Civil War, apparently obtained U.S. Grant's reluctant permission for his famous March to the Sea. I always heard he cut the telephone lines as he went through in his March to the Sea, and the reason he did was so that Grant could not change his mind. Crazy. Captured Savannah on December 22nd, 1864, and he sent the message to President Lincoln, "I give you a Christmas gift." To Lincoln, Savannah. And the final one from this year, this was December 29th of 1968. Aldous Huxley, famous author from 1894 to 1963, wrote in the dark. Amazing. Because of an eye defect he suffered while studying in Eton, England, Huxley learned to read Braille and to type with the touch system. And though his eyes improved later in life, he still type for hours in total darkness. Aldous Huxley. So that wraps up this episode. All the Sunday comics, or at least most of them, from 1968, from the time that Strange as It Seems was run by my parents, Ernest Jr. and Phyllis. If you like content like this, hit the bell to subscribe. Leave a like, leave a follow, leave a comment. It goes a long way to helping me bring this brand back. And as I always do, I'll finish this episode with the foreword from John Hix, the creator of Strange as It Seems, who wrote in the foreword of his very first book in 1928. The author launches this book of the curious in nature and humankind on the vast sea of public opinion with the hope that it will fulfill its mission to entertain and acquaint its readers with some of the marvels of the world in which we live.